what is garbage? If you rethink it as an opportunity to turn an undesirable situation into something better, it becomes good garbage.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage?
It is not often that we are left so inspired by the actions and impact of another individual. I am fortunate to have the opportunity to connect with Alvin Lim, the CEO of Ripax and now NBCo. Alvin has literally changed the way electronics are packaged in this world and now is in the process of disrupting the beverage space. He is a quintessential entrepreneur who has built incredibly successful businesses by seeing opportunities and delivering the impossible. I have spent time twice in person with him now and would call him a friend. This is a story of guts, glory, passion, and substance, told in a very guarded way. Enjoy the conversation.
Hello, hello. I'm so happy today to have my friend Alvin join me on the podcast, and I'm a big fan of Alvin, and we've only met once actually, and I'm already a big fan. So I'm so excited about this conversation, Alvin, and I know you're so busy, so thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Vet, for having me. I'm pretty excited because, there's so much work we need to do. Looking forward to it.
Super. So of course, we have to get to your companies, both Ripax and NBCo, but let's start with you growing up, because you grew up in the beautiful country of Singapore. And each time I visit there, I'm amazed at what the country achieved. What are the influences that you got from where you grew up, and how did they make the person that you are?
That's a very good question. I think being from Singapore, I'm very lucky, I guess. First and foremost, we are a relatively small country, of course. It's safe. And growing up in Singapore, everything was structured. But for me, even from a very young age, I was impatient. I was impatient to make a difference, impatient to make a change. And so when I started down my career, even in school, I was always thinking, how can I get to the next stage faster? How can I make that difference? For Singapore, all male citizens have to go through military. And military further reinforced the fact that I needed to catch up. So when I went to university, I did a 3-year course because I wanted to graduate as quickly as possible. I was very certain I wanted to start my own business. And in doing that, I knew that I had to leave Singapore because what I wanted to do, is not a normal path, not a normal career path for most Singaporeans in my generation. Because Singapore is a small country, so everything has to be very efficient. The policies have to be efficient, the education has to be efficient. It's almost like we're out on a production line. For good or for bad, the basis of everything that they taught me was extremely useful when I furthered my education in the US. I think Singapore really gave me a great base, but what really made that difference for me was taking that next step to the US.
And just to understand more, because I didn't ask you this the last time we met, what about your parents? What were they doing, and what was their background like?
My parents, very, very traditional. My mom was a teacher. My dad worked in a bank. And in their generation, they were one bank, one career, their entire life. So all they understood was they wanted for me was stability, working for a company, making sure you get good grades. And that was my generation. My generation in Singapore was the cookie cutter generation. That just do it, just work.
So you were clearly the wild child. You probably
Yes.
the wild child.
Really didn't want to go down that path. My parents were not thrilled about that, for sure.
Did you stretch them completely?
Oh, you wouldn't believe it. When I wanted to start my own business, they were like, don't do this. It's not right. But I think in the end, I didn't even convince them because I didn't have a great plan. But I knew that I wanted to do this and I prepared for it. They didn't have a choice actually because I was in the US, right? So that was a great escape.
Let's switch to that. So why did you choose USC? Because it's of course a great school, and studying there, and why choose accounting? So was that also to do with did you know early on that you're going to be in business and you wanted to do something with business? Was that the reason, or were there other reasons?
Well, I did my accounting undergraduate. When I went to USC, I went for my MBA. But there was an interesting reason why I pursued that path. Because out of school, once you finish accounting, you normally work for the big six, and at the time was the big six. So when you start working for the big six, you just go through the ranks, and that was the expectation of you. But I was hungry for more. I've got actually a great story for this because when we entered Pricewaterhouse, 2.5 years behind our peers, the female students who were of the same age, we were 2.5 years behind. I was extremely impatient, right? I wanted to do something. I want to do something more. And in my head, I was 2.5 years behind. So how do you catch up 2.5 years? I did crazy stuff, right? I would get to the office 6 a.m. in the morning. I would go back 10 p.m. at night. The only reason why I was doing this was because I did this computation. All accountants, they count time, right? So I did this computation. I went like, if I work the extra 5 hours a day, I should be able to catch up by this amount of time. Well, of course, that doesn't work, right? You have tons and tons of clients. You have to work. You have to read up so much. But fortunately for me, this is what happened, and this is why I went to USC. I was seated in my desk on a Saturday trying to read up all these files, and one of my US partners came up and he said to me, "What in the world are you doing here on a Saturday?" I said, "I'm just reading up on this particular client." And he says, "That's my client. Why are you reading up on that client?" I said, "No, look, I'm trying to find out more." So he went, "Okay." He left. Next weekend, he saw me there again. On the third weekend, he came by and said, "Look, you're not going to learn much from reading the files. Why don't we go and grab a cup of coffee?" So I bought him a cup of coffee. And after that, every weekend, he would basically do a data dump on everything that he learned. So my path went from here to here all of a sudden. And every good thing is a bad thing, right? So once I started understanding the client and all the difficulties and nuances of each of his clients, I got to attend meetings and I was able to contribute. When I was able to contribute, other partners were like, "Whoa, this guy knows his stuff," right? Which was great. But all I did was because I had the opportunity to network. Now all of a sudden they said to me, "Oh man, I think we should give you the opportunity to do your chartered accountancy," where they wanted to sign a bond. All my US partners said to me, "I don't think you're cut for that. Why don't I write you a recommendation letter? Go do your MBA." And that's what basically changed everything. Because from his perspective, he knew I was impatient. And when I did my MBA, I was like 26. And there was an opportunity to actually meet and network with people who are far more experienced than myself. My 2 years at USC, I hardly studied on that. I did not go to class. I kid you not. If my dad knew that, he would say, "Oh my gosh, all that money spent, you didn't go to class." Everything I learned or most of what I learned in business school, I learned through networking receptions. The USC network is extremely strong. So I would actually have opportunities to do information interviews with people from Walt Disney, anybody, and you just find a name. They're more than happy to talk to you. And so I started gathering a lot of information and building my network in the US. And that put me in a very good position when I wanted to start my business.
You were clearly born to be a hustler.
That is true.
Making things happen. So there's a saying in India which says, and when you talked about the person who you started taking out for coffee, there's a saying which says, when the disciple is ready, the teacher appears. So you clearly kind of manifest that, right? Like you were ready and somebody came to teach you about, what you needed to learn at that stage.
I think for me, I always think it's a learning. It's a two-way learning thing, right? That even when I met you, and I started understanding what your company did. For me, it's an eye opener because for me, it's about doing it differently. And we each accumulate that amount of experience. And I can't possibly lead your life. But by talking to you and understanding how you did it, then I'm thinking, maybe there's an opportunity to apply some of the learnings that you accumulated in your life or your experience. And then I say, that is how potentially we can make changes so that we do things better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just find like meeting you was such a joy for me because I think in that one and a half hours that we had, I just learned so much. And I've told that story to so many people. And then, of course, I immediately reached out to you that you need to tell the story to more people because you'll just inspire so many people out there to kind of do the things you've done. And of course, we'll get more and more into it. But a side note, my daughter goes to NYU for the film school, but her first choice was
Nice.
USC, and it's called like exactly what you were saying. It's called like the USC mafia, right? It's
Yes.
literally like every USC person helps each other, and
Yes.
they kind of stand by each other. So that's interesting. But what I see from your trajectory is that you took some time even after USC. You didn't get into the business immediately. So tell us more about that, and then how did dry packs happen initially?
Okay. It's interesting because when I went to USC, it was just before the dot-com bubble burst. So when I first went to school, we got together with a couple of friends. I mean, these were my new MBA classmates. We were just brainstorming business ideas. We were going to get funded. But part of the agreement was that we had to quit school in order for the funding to come in. So the 5 core members had to quit school. Fortunately or unfortunately, the bubble burst and everything came to a grinding halt. So I finished my education, and because the economy wasn't great at the point in time, so the first opportunity, because I felt that I needed to stay in the United States to understand what I wanted to pick as my next business venture. So I decided to start first working and worked for 2 companies. Very fortunate because once again, I had very good mentors in both companies. One was Autodesk, the makers of AutoCAD. And after that, I went with my senior director onwards to Get Inc. So 2 very, very different organizations. But in both, I saw something that was happening right at that point in time. Outsourcing was the big buzzword then. So for me, being Chinese and the fact that a lot of outsourcing projects were going to China, they saw me as a natural person or someone who could manage the projects. So that was actually the first foray into understanding the requirements, or rather getting my hands around how to get products and goods from Asia into the US. There were crazy opportunities because there was a lot of inefficiencies. When there's inefficiencies, there's opportunity. So I'll give one example. Not a good example, but I was doing analysis and I found this furniture. So this was furniture project, right? I was like, why were there like $7 million worth of furniture just sitting in a warehouse? And then I realized I went there. I drove down. This wasn't part of my job. So I drove down. I talked to the warehouse manager and he told me because there was a design flaw, the tables aren't strong enough to hold a person's weight. But I say these are store fixtures. So why would you need a person's weight? I said there could be that somebody would stand on the tables. I said, great. Okay, let's fix it. Let's fix it. Let's put some metal hinges on the sides, or brackets on the sides of the table and you'll solve it. No, it can't be done. I said, I'm willing to do it. It says, no, it cannot be done. Health, there's safety issues. 7 million bet, just chucked. It was crazy. So I asked the natural question. I said, so if I were to do this project for you, would you give me the opportunity to do it? And hence, that became my first project, my first business. Before I got into packaging, my first foray was in very specific furniture, gaming furniture.
Yeah, so I hear. That's so interesting. I've actually one thing from when you were speaking before about the dot com bubble and the deal being that you'll have to quit university. I can't even imagine what your parents would have gone through
I
then.
know.
If you had
They
said,
will have
not
a
only
heart
have I
attack.
gone to USC, I have dropped out. That would have been
Exactly.
next level.
It's already bad that I don't attend classes.
Yeah, but that they don't know, right?
Yep,
But if you drop out, they know. So
exactly.
that would have been a disaster. But one question. So of course you're Chinese by origin, but you grew up in Singapore. But did you have enough exposure to China? Had you been spending time in China or not really before the business came about?
So I'm the fourth generation born in Singapore. So our ancestral roots are in Fujian, China. On my grandmother's side, they were from the Canton province. So we still have family in both provinces, but not too much business exposure. I did go back to visit family and friends, but before that, it was still relatively a completely new experience for me.
But did you speak Mandarin or Cantonese, or
Yes.
how good was your Mandarin or Cantonese?
Okay. So once you've been in the US for a certain number of years, I still thought that my Mandarin was pretty decent until I started hosting business meetings and all the technical jargon. And when I always observe when I talk, right? I was looking and I knew all these blank faces. They didn't understand a word I was saying. But you learn, you improve rapidly because I was there all the time. When we started the business, immediately I brought on US staff, and once the US staff were more in place, then I started spending more and more time in China. I think you're kind of forced, right? You're thrown into that environment whereby rapidly you have to make a lot of presentations, you explain client requirements, you have to convert quality documents and process documents from English to Mandarin. Very, very rapidly, my Chinese improved.
Yeah, that's definitely a great plus, right? If you
Yes.
can you actually speak Chinese with an American accent or a Singaporean accent, or
Oh, that
that's not
one's.
possible? What was your accent like?
I think my Chinese is all mixed up. Um, if you ask somebody from China, they probably say, you speak with a Taiwanese accent. If I go to Taiwan, instantly they say, you're either from Malaysia or Singapore. When I'm in the US, nobody can tell.
That's amazing. So okay, so furniture, gaming, but then sustainable packaging. Those are, of course, a little bit wider apart. So how does that transition happen?
Great question. The first thing, one of the big projects that we had was that one of our clients said, Alvin, we love what you do, but when you ship to us in London, can you not use any foam? Back then, early 2000s, the bad word wasn't plastics. They were looking to get out of EPS, polystyrene, right? So back then they would say, you can ship this to us, but you cannot use foam in your packaging. That's when we started searching for alternative solutions. And so we started with doing corner caps. Molded fiber corner caps are made out of a combination of recycled corrugated or recycled newspaper. So that was the first step. Once I started doing that, I knew that this was kind of the right thing to do. We needed to make that change. And this made that change. So what I did was I kind of broke the business into two. Because once we saw that opportunity, there was way other stuff to do. And I started making calls to my USC alumni and my MBA classmates. The next thing that immediately fell into my lap was the wine industry in Napa. The 2 bottle, 3 bottle wine shippers were all, for the wine clubs, they used to be all done out of EPS. And so we split the company into Ripex that does packaging and Ripex Furniture, which does gaming furniture. So once we did that split, I decided to relinquish control and management of Ripex Gaming to my partner and then focus primarily on the packaging portion. Our motto was to change the world one box at a time. because we were relatively small. And back then, the wine industry was something that, well, we figured it's all boxers, right? Going out to people all across the United States. So we figured if we can start making that difference, we'll slowly make that change.
I would say good for the world that sustainable packaging got you, because you obviously did make huge change, and that's what I want to get to. So, of course, it's one thing to manufacture basic paper-based, protective packaging. It's quite another, and you and I both know, to make sophisticated, cutting-edge electronics packaging. How does that transition happen? And should can be easy. And you've told me a few stories, but I'm sure there are more on how that transition happened, and then of course the challenges that you faced in order to make that happen.
Yeah, we were fortunate because once we did this change for the wine industry, people stood up and took notice. If the world doesn't have a good alternative, a viable alternative, then it gives people an excuse, an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We can't change because there's nothing to change to. So once we started going down that path, people saw that possibility. And we did that show in Las Vegas, Pack Expo in Las Vegas. And we got a lot of exposure because we were at that, imagine that year, there were only 4 booths that were showing molded fiber. Yeah. Can you imagine? I didn't.
Now there are
Yeah.
like 70,
Yes,
70
exactly.
at least.
Easily 70, right? Even then, when I went to China, the number of factories, I literally covered in the Guangdong province. I went to see every single molded fiber manufacturer. And I could do it because there weren't that many at the point in time. People would call me crazy because they felt that no, it's the world of EPS, it's the world of plastics, and you're trying to do it in fiber. There's no way to get this done. So Vet, you're spot on. It was a huge challenge at the point in time, but we got lucky again. We got lucky because at the next stage, we did external packaging for one of the world's largest electronic companies. They were willing to sit down with us and said, there's a 10-year journey that we need to be on. We need to get out of EPS. We need to get out of plastics. And we know it's going to take 10 years. Are you willing to take that journey with us? So, of course, I said yes. I mean, I wanted it more than them. Even before I met them, I knew that there was something that I wanted to do. It's just that I didn't know the scale that they were talking about. But so gradually it started, first on industrial, recycled corrugated and recycled newspaper. But eventually they wanted to take that big next step. Now, from a technology perspective, it was a huge challenge. So we needed to get expertise that were outside of paper. Because if you want to supply the electronics industry, you sure can't use people who are used to be working in the paper industry. It's very different. So we started bringing in people who knew about tooling, machinists, industrial engineers. They were very, who are experts in their field, metalworks and plastics. We brought them in and told them kind of the vision and what we wanted to do. And then, of course, with support also from our client who had access to a lot of engineers, we pushed the entire industry from molded fiber to what was external packaging to internal packaging that could be utilized or rather utilized for the electronics industry. But it was a huge challenge and our clients were extremely impatient. But overall, it helped.
So one impatient person meets another impatient person. That's a good
Exactly.
match, right? Then you
Yeah.
make big changes after that. And I have to ask you for this one story that completely enthralled me on how you managed to set up 57 machines, I think, in 6 months, something like that. It was crazy, right?
Yes.
That's what I remember. But like the audience has to hear the story. This is remarkable. And the I could just imagine when you were even talking to me, this round table and the Chinese government sitting and getting things done. But they have to hear it from you. So it's just a remarkable story of entrepreneurship.
Okay. Let me try to say it in the right way. Usually when I tell people this story, Vet, I always say, please don't repeat this story because I can't perform that trick again. But we were very, very lucky. Ripex is very lucky in that we had a partnership with a very strong Chinese company, because in order to get things done or to expedite things in China, you need connections. And being Singaporean, I was still on the outside looking in. I can look Chinese, but I'm not from China. And some of the nuances in the local governments, the support needed, it's years and years of relationships. So our partner at the point in time had these relationships, and we had to be a partner with them to make this happen. That was actually very, very important, because it was a lot of money and it had to be built, like you said, in 6 months. So that was actually a huge challenge. Now, from a client perspective, they really wanted to make that huge conversion. We had executed very successfully a SKU that was running at lower volumes, but now they wanted to make that big change. We had to think outside the box, of course. Firstly, when it comes to, when you're setting up a factory, first the land, the infrastructure, immediately, to your point, we had to get the government in place. But in any country, if you were to go step by step by step, it will always be a challenge. But I think in China and during COVID, a lot of the world got to witness a building of a hospital, right? In a matter of weeks, right? The Chinese government did it. They also did the same for us for this particular project, because we convinced the local government that this project was for sustainability, would create jobs, and still most importantly, it would make an impact when it came to sustainable packaging. They really believed in that vision. When somebody like this believes, or the government believes, that you're going to make the change, the next thing is the actions they're willing to do to get it done. So approvals, permits, they were very, very supportive. Then the next big surprise for me was the fact that they helped us stop the entire production line that does motorized vehicles, so that we could expedite the building of 57 machines. I mean, even right now, if you look at Europe, you place an order for a forming machine, it's like 12, 18 months. We built 57 machines in 3 months. Produced, tested, and online in 3 months. Anybody in the business would have said, that's just crazy, but we managed to do it. We lived day and night at the factory, but we managed to pull it off.
It's truly, truly remarkable and inspiring. And I was so blown away with that story. And of course, there's so much more detail in that story, but thank you so much for sharing that. So, of course, I'm very familiar with molded fiber machines on the food serviceware side, plates, bowls, clamshells. And I'm a little familiar with the protective packaging side. We also have been making egg trays for a while, so the rotating machines. But the kind of products that you made are not similar to that. They're much more, the angles are very different. The finish is very different. So teach us, how does the technology really change between, in the end, it's a bunch of fibers getting drained. That's all right, but it's not the same. Same, but different kind of an idea. So how does the technology really alter when you're trying to do such sophisticated products?
Very good question. I think when you look at industrial molded fiber, from my point of view, with every difference in the forming machine, we're getting technical here. Every difference in the forming machines, right? There's a different requirement. From my perspective, when I first embarked on this business with the wine shippers, and of course we did shippers for other bottle forms and things on that line. But one of the very important things to me was making sure that we consume as little energy as possible. So, like probably in your case or your factory's that a lot of your products would actually, once they come out the forming line, they would actually sit for a period of time while the moisture basically evaporates. So that when you actually do have to press them into shape, you actually use a minimum amount or the shortest amount of time and electricity and energy to basically press the parts that is suitable, fit for purpose. This was also the case for the furniture end caps. Try to air dry them, reduce the amount of energy you needed, and then produce the part. and the part will come out. It will be a bit coarse, and that's what you use for exterior protective packaging. I love the idea. Now, when you want to convert something which has much cleaner finish, there are several things that have to happen. One is that your tooling technology has to be different, your suction has to be different. So what it means is that, and then your how you heat it and press it, the tonnage, the amount of the temperature, it all has to be controlled, and it has to be very precise because the part is almost as accurate as plastic, but you're doing it in natural fiber. So imagine that challenge when we first started. For us, understanding all these nuances and putting them together in something that you could produce millions and millions of units was a challenge. But the real challenge was how to reduce the energy, how to reduce the cycle time. Because one of the big things is that this parts is coming out wet, right? So imagine this. It's like you get your clothes out of your washing machine, and instead of waiting for it to dry, you just take an iron and you're ironing your clothes. Of course, the clothes will come out super crisp and flat, but imagine how much energy you're using. So for me, that was actually the bigger challenge there. The parts, you can definitely press apart. It's just about how you do your machining, your industrial engineering, to making sure your accuracy is there, your tooling is there. But still, what it comes back to, you can't build $1,000 for a part that plastic does in $1 at $1, right? So you have to figure that out, and that was actually the bigger challenge for us.
Was there a similar idea that the teachers appeared when the disciple was ready? Did you get many ideas? Because of course the Chinese have been at it for a while, but even when I go around China, they are quite basic, rudimentary, semi-automatic machines that are working on making plates and bowls, and and yeah, some have improved. There are some robots working, and there are some, some automatic kind of machines. But then again, there are very few. In fact, I shared with you, there was one factory that I went to that was doing electronics, and that had almost 30% wastage, and you did not. So that's a very different model again. So did the teachers appear? Did you find the right people? Or you really had to go back to the drawing board and just explore and get the things right?
It was actually a combination that I think when it comes to certain basic things, I mean, for us it may seem I mean, for certain industries it's relatively easy. But I think when we started for molded fiber, it was definitely a challenge. There wasn't enough expertise in this space, not enough engineers in this space. So, and there wasn't enough people working on it. That's why that point in time, the big rallying cry was, we need to collaborate so that we can bring this to fruition faster. If we're all going on our own paths, then nothing's gonna work, or rather it's gonna take way too long. Back then it was a combination, right? Talking to professors from different universities, funding some of their research. So on the academic side, definitely to at least get the academics who are focused on paper and fiber to look at molded fiber. So that was definitely one area. The second thing, like I said earlier, was to find companies that weren't actually doing tooling or engineering for molded fiber to start looking at it. And I think that actually changed the entire industry too, because without these guys taking an interest, or these companies taking an interest in molded fiber, a lot of the engineering side, it probably wouldn't have been as quick. When I started that, a factory would easily have 300, 500 people. It's very labor intensive. They would transfer the molds, everything, a lot by hand. The quality control used to be an entire line of people, and they'd be like looking at the products. Right now, everything is automated. I'd love for you to visit our factories in China or Vietnam, and you will see that the quality control that's automated. A lot of the labor that used to transfer the parts now is all robotic arm. And it's a bit of irony, right? Because given the amount of the population of China, I mean, but I think in our space, in the world of fiber, especially when it comes to molded fiber, there are certain months in some parts of China which the temperature really gets hot and it's a bit challenging to work on the line. So I think with industrial engineering and machines in place, I think it's so much better to have robotic arms.
Yeah, so one thing you mentioned in the middle was this big buzzword called cycle time.
Yes.
That's obviously a huge make or break, like and for any molded fiber kind of production. And there are so many variables that matter in that. One of the big things that I've seen is the pulp and the pulp quality, right? You can set everything right. You can set the heat right, you can set the pressure right, you can set improve your vacuum, etc., etc., etc. But there's one thing which is not in your control, which is the pulp. So how do you manage to get that recipe right? And it's never homogeneous, right? It's always going to be a mix, and it's going to be seasonal. Bagasse is going to vary, and bamboo is going to vary. So how did you manage to get that part right in order to get homogeneity? Because your products are so sophisticated that I'm sure a little blemish there will get rejected, right? So getting that right must have been a challenge as well.
Yes, it was a challenge. And I think now we're getting into really specifics, but like I said, that I would love for you to come visit us. Once you see how we basically process all the pre-work that has to take place, we went through so many iterations, temperature control, fibrillation of the fibers, whose machines are better and not. We've tried machines from China, Korea, Taiwan, initially to make this work. The client at the point in time also sent down material specialists to help us with this. And it did take us maybe 6 months to get this right. I mean, even the hardness of the water, right? The water impacts the, yeah,
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
everything, there's so many variables because you still are dealing with a natural material, fiber. So we have a process, and right now everything is computerized, which means that if you see a variation, we immediately would take corrective action so that we will get that consistency. But I think the opportunity for you is that once you come and see what we do, I think you have an understanding. And I think across the board, this sharing has to happen so that we are able to produce consistently in different countries. And that's why right now, right, for this particular portion, we're extremely big because on this because we're working with companies in different regions, completely different fiber source, completely different water, and all the analysis has to go in beforehand. Once we input it into our computer system, a lot of it has to be automated because you can't have workers going in there and figuring out how many liters are going in order to make sure that the product is going to come out consistent. So we have a process, and like I said, we'll be more than happy to host you should you decide to come to visit us.
I am for sure taking you up on that offer. I'm just, I'm like, there's going to be so much to learn from what you've achieved for sure. So I'm very excited about that. And thank you for the offer. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about was one is, of course, electronic packaging, setting it up, getting various customers, but you also got into adjacencies like cosmetic packaging and things like that. How different are the markets? And what about the receptivity? And the third part, which you mentioned before, on the cost side, were you able to take the cost off the table and say that don't worry about it, we will match whatever you're using? Or how did you add value so that those customers would come and stay with you and work with you?
Wow. Okay, three parts, right? Okay, let's talk about the first part. Consumer electronics, of course, the resale price of those or the selling price of those are relatively high. So if you're talking about, a phone or a watch, the selling price is very high. So you can basically compute how much your packaging cost is. But no matter what, every year they will face cost pressures and, it's all about how do we design it to be better? How do we drive that cost down? Cost down quarter over quarter, year over year. That is extremely, extremely important. I think one of the first things that we are very fortunate when we're working with our clients is that we work usually with the design and development team. So they understand, firstly, there was a lot of education on both sides on the nuances of fiber versus plastic. That's accepted. Then the next thing that has to be rethought is the specifications because your specifications actually drive price. Imagine asking for specifications of plastic, but you want it in fiber. That would be highly unrealistic. So that is the first part of the journey. Now, when it comes to cost, it's about, once again, first part is still specifications, because if you reject a tiny bit of wrinkle because it's a fiber, or you reject it because there are 10 dots instead of 3 dots, then your cost will go up. So firstly, it's about managing that level of specifications and the quality control. The next one, of course, is increasing efficiency. You brought up cycle times. Usually when a project first starts, the cycle times do tend to be a bit higher, in the 200s. But our goal eventually is to bring it down as low as possible. The lower we get, then the more likely we are able to hit or get the price points that are comparable. I think back in the day, early 2000s, very easily for cosmetic molded fiber, whether it's cosmetics or electronics, easily 70% and up, the difference in price, right? It used to be crazy. That's why it used to be very, very challenging for clients to accept that. But over time, the technology improved, the cycle times improve, the pre-processes improve. So you would actually be able to control a lot of things better. You eventually start driving price down, whereby now you're looking at slowly over time, 30%, 20%. Now there are very many instances where it's only single digit percentage differences. So when that happens, then the client would be definitely more willing to accept that.
No, I understand that, but I'm just thinking, like one of the discussions that we end up having always with our sales teams, that it's actually not the price, it is the value creation. And that's what you need to explain to the client. And of course, when I look at your packaging, it's so beautiful. So I would love to learn from you. One, and I break this question also down to two parts. One is, of course, the idea of how do you explain to the customer that this is going to create more value for their brand by using a more sophisticated packaging, because it does. I see your packaging and I say, wow, as a consumer. And even before I met you, right, I used the products which you package for, and I was always like, this is amazing packaging, just the fit, the feel, the sophistication of it. And connected to that, the second part of the question, how do you get so sophisticated in your design ability? Because you have to obviously continuously work with the client and come out with beautiful designs. So we'd love to learn both those from you.
It's a very good question. I think from a value creation perspective, not all clients actually see that value. Some clients flat out, even if they have a chief sustainability officer, sometimes the founder of the company does not believe, because they're looking at the bottom line, right? Very often they're looking at the bottom line. So your value creation only works if you have a champion within the organization. And that champion must really look at this and go, I think that this is extremely important. It is not just important to myself as the value of our core values in the company to become more sustainable, but it is also a core value of our customers or end clients. I think that must firstly be in sync. Because if that's not in sync, you can try to create that value for them. There will be only one department that sees it, which is the sustainability department, right? Or perhaps if you're lucky, also the marketing guys will go like, yes, we need to do this. But once again, you get your cost guys, you got your CFO, and they're not going to go along with this. So from our perspective, right, one of the key things, and we're fortunate because we considered that we started this much earlier. We had the opportunity to work with companies that already decided that they wanted to do this. I think so. It's just a fit, right? Because right now everybody is trying to say that you've got to do something for sustainability. You have to reduce your carbon footprint, but that joining those dotted lines is where the challenge is. Only by joining the dotted lines, then you can create your value creation. So two paths, I would say, for us. One is that instead of working with the buying department, the guys who look at the numbers, who look at per unit cost, we got to first start with the visionaries, the people who are in product design, the people who are looking at packaging in 5 years. Once you get that department, I think if you start working in that department, there's a higher possibility and chance for you to succeed because they also see that value. But then again, you also need to build it, like help them build that story, provide them the data points so that they can bring it to the other departments. Very often, motor fiber vet, we get crushed. We get crushed at one stage, the stage whereby when they do product testing, legal. Once you get to that stage, the guys are like, ah, man, it's like cosmetics, for example. We need it for 30 months, which is a requirement, a regulation, right? This thing is only going to last 18 months on the shelf, 24 months maximum. We're not going to take that risk. Let somebody else do it first. So you have to identify the early adopters, and there are not many of those out there. So if you were to try get your sales team to keep knocking on doors, they'll be bashing their heads against very often a lot of people who are just going to say no to them. So I think that is the first thing. And then of course the second thing is what you and I are doing, forcing the people to realize that there are alternatives that are viable. I think that's important. So what we're doing, going out there, speaking at events like Rethinking Materials, like launching our products in Davos, it's the guys who can see this making a difference, not just for a single corporation, but an entire community, an entire country. And they are the ones that have to drive policy that evens the playing field. And only then can you have an increased value creation because they then realize we have to make this change and we have to make this change happen sooner rather than later.
And the second part of the question, which I'm also very, very intrigued by, how did you develop such sophisticated design ability? Because it is complex, right? Again, from a fiber perspective, you can do certain things, you cannot do certain things. If you have too many ridges, there's going to be some crack somewhere. The production guys have to be involved on the design phase, otherwise they're going to cry later. I face this every day as well. We get some really nice design in, and our production guy is like livid. And they're like, dude, like, how did you give this cut, which is, my wire is not going to bend here. So there is a lot of method to the madness, but I clearly see this beautiful kind of emergence of design in every product that you've shown me. So how did that evolve? Because I'm sure that's also a journey to be had.
Yes, that was a very painful journey, but I mean, I think sometimes when faced with a challenge, either sink or you swim, right? So in our case, our main client is extremely, extremely demanding. They are the types of people that when you tell them no, they said, I don't accept that. Get it done yesterday. So under this type of tremendous pressure, we were forced to do testing that probably no one else in the industry will have tested. I 100% agree with you that when we first brought all these designs to our engineers, every single one would say, Alvin, no way. You're right. You say, this is crazy. This is impossible. I've done molded fiber for 20 years. Don't get me started. It's impossible. But our client would never accept no for an answer. So we did spend a lot of development money. And as a result of all this development that we did, we accumulated all the data points into a computerized system. So a lot of what we do beforehand, in the past, right, you would take like 10, 20 designs, maybe do 8 molds, and then you streamline it to 2, and finally produce a product that fortunately that you think it's beautiful, so we're happy about that. But but imagine it used to be such a costly and time-consuming process. Now accumulating all the data points right now, we just have to run through a computer program, and it will basically show a lot of the fail points. The client will, of course, will still challenge, but now you have data. And once you have data, it's easier to convince the client to make certain changes. Let's say this ridge cannot be at this angle, it cannot be so close, or this has to be expanded a bit so that the forming is more stable. It's by providing data points rather than just telling them, hey, believe in me, I've been doing this for 20 years. The client won't accept that. So we have the data points that support a lot of the design work that we do.
We would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Good Garbage is sponsored by Packer, a family of brands that produces compostable packaging and works to implement regenerative solutions. Packer's new project is to bring compostable food serviceware and food carry products to the North American marketplace. Learn more at packer.com. Now back to the conversation. So let's switch to your current obsession. Why NBCo? Why the paper bottle? And of course, I've challenged you before, and I'm going to do it again. Why not just let the glass guys and the aluminum guys do it? Why do you want to hit your head against that wall now? Why do you want paper bottles?
Yeah, that's a. I guess I like people calling me crazy. I don't know. Maybe that's me. No, I'm just kidding.
Not much doubt about that for sure, Alvin. You can take that as a compliment.
I think one of the key reasons why I'm doing this is because I'm from Singapore, so we go very often to countries like in Indonesia. The beaches used to be pristine, right? And my kids were younger at the time, and they said to me, we're walking on the beach, we're doing beach cleanup. I think no kid enjoys a beach cleanup, even though you explain stuff to them. And so my older said to me, Dad, you said you're doing all these things to rid the world of plastic, Why are we still doing this? Why is there still so many bottles? Why do I have to pick up so many bottles? He probably doesn't think I'm doing a very good job. It always starts with the kids, right? Then you realize, hey, th- you know, we didn't build this mess. I didn't create plastic bottles that are in the sea, but it's kind of our generation and our responsibility now, because if we don't start or stop the plastics tap and come up with alternative solutions, the people who are going to have to clean this up are the kids. So for me, I know that whatever change we make in the environment to reduce the amount of microplastics and use of plastic, it'll probably take hundreds of years. But at least we start this year, right? We have to start. If we don't start, then there will never be an alternative. There won't be a solution. We can't stop unnecessary use of plastic. I think we have to accept that we're never going to 100% get rid of plastic. It's just very difficult because people are just getting too used to the convenience of having plastic. But I think what we also have to accept is that we have to do something about it, and we have to do something about it now. That's why your journey and my journey are so intertwined. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you and so excited to visit you in the next couple of weeks, because I do believe that the journey that we are on is something that has to be done, and it has to be done as soon as possible.
Thank you for that. And I'm of course equally excited to be seeing you so soon. So of course, you being you, don't just create a paper bottle. You create a really crazy one again.
Okay.
So again, I was amazed to see it because my challenge has been that whenever I've heard or seen a paper bottle, it's basically two pieces of molded fiber stuck together and a plastic lining inside it. If not a plastic, then a PLA lining inside it. And then even the neck is typically plastic and the closure is typically plastic. I was totally blown away when I saw yours, so it was totally molded. It looked seamless. It was beautiful looking again. I know you downplay your design, but there is just simplicity and beauty in that. Maybe just learning over the years. But not only that, you'd done the neck and the closure all in cellulose, which was remarkable. So I would love to, and of course the listeners, I'm sure we would love to learn that journey. How do you crack a huge challenge like that? And of course, you also told me that the barrier was not petroleum polymers anymore and would break down. So, and that's a huge challenge as well. So would love to learn about the journey and how you took this on. Of course, you told me how you took this on, but then the story after that.
Sure. I'll break into two parts. We've been working on the bottle actually for the probably close to 10 years now. But when we started, it wasn't really it was definitely a bottle shape, but it was more for the purposes of medical. And I'm sure you've seen it in hospitals before. The original thought process was that if we can remove the stainless steel or plastic trays in hospitals, Then can we do more? Can we do urinals? Can we do bedpans? And the urinal concept was actually the start of the making of the bottle. So back then, if you could form a single form urinal for the hospitals, which fortunately right now is actually used in quite a number of hospitals, at least even in Singapore. But that's similar production process. We streamlined it so that we could produce the high-end bottles that you see, the bottles that you saw in London. So we use the same technology, refine the tooling, refine the type of fibers that were used, and we were able to come up with this new type of bottle that we have. Yeah. So it's a lot of new technology that was applied in the electronics industry, a lot of changes in processes, but it was 10 years in the making. So it didn't happen overnight. It was just something that we were able to do. And once I made that decision, we have to try using our new technology onto bottles. That's when both things met and we were able to produce the that high-end bottle that you saw. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that saying, right? That all overnight successes have 10 years of perspiration behind
Yeah.
them, or something like that. We call it overnight, but
Yeah, I
what
know.
has gone into it is a huge journey.
I think the other thing too you brought up is that that's not never good enough because we all know that good looking fiber bottle will not be able to hold liquid or even dry goods if there isn't enough sufficient barrier properties with regards to that. And that's why during COVID, we took that opportunity because everybody was stuck, in their own countries. We spent that time developing our relationship with a lot of coating manufacturers. They would send over their coatings and we would test them on the bottles because that's the only thing that we could do. And so we've been working on coatings now for more than 4 years. We're very excited because a lot of these coatings that we are working with, we have found ways to get around challenges that probably a lot of our peers are facing. I think the difference between us and working with these coating companies and maybe some of our peers is that using that technology that we have, our substrate is more refined. When it's more refined, it allows us to get the coatings on better so that the barrier properties and the performance of the bottle is much better than probably other things that are on the market.
Yeah, it's definitely the magic sauce, because we both know that people have been trying to solve the barrier challenge for a long time. And I discussed with you on numerous substrates, right? It's not just the food products,
Yes.
it's also the flexible packaging. And everywhere I go, there are people trying to solve it. Like I had discussions yesterday with a lab in London, and they were trying to do the same thing. And they said every client that they get today is all about barrier. So it's remarkable when I see how you've gone about it, and at least gotten out with the first version, and I'm sure there'll be continuous improvement from here. So I wanted to stay with that and ask you more about your process for R&D. Do you have a large team like Nestle, like Vive sitting there and 300 scientists doing something? Do you outsource it, or do you have a bunch of three scientists doing it? How do you go about that process? Is it very sophisticated, or is it just finding ways to get it done with a few people? How does that work for you?
Okay. If it's on the molded fiber side, our R&D team is all in-house, majority in-house. Once again, we always leverage the universities. So we have close ties with certain universities and certain professors. So with those close ties, we will actually fund research because a lot of the work actually is out there and available. Once we identify a university that has done sufficient research in the categories that we are interested in, then we'll fund their research. We find that that's more effective than hiring somebody in-house. And because their expertise may be this narrow, but what we need is a combination, which means that we got to have maybe two or three different parts to work together. And we find that working with universities or professors who are experts in those disciplines is actually more effective. But ultimately, the R&D is, of course, controlled and managed by our own internal R&D team. So that is for molded fiber. In the case of coatings, it's extremely challenging. What we can do on our end is, of course, take the coatings and apply it to our bottle. right? That portion of it we can definitely do. Some of it, if we need it accelerated, of course, we use external labs. But for the coatings itself, we rely on the companies that we partner with or some of the brands. They actually do provide, they've been very lucky working with the brands because, like I said, once you get into the development stage or with the development team of certain brands, they provide you access also to their resources and their labs, and they're willing to do testing with you. And we've been very fortunate with the brands that we've selected because their leadership is very supportive of this. I think it works both ways because very often they won't share their formulation with us. So I can produce the perfect bottle with what I think is the perfect coating, but when I put their cosmetics in it, it could fail, right? Because I can't know specifically what goes into their cosmetics, and every cosmetic potentially formulation could potentially be different. Likewise, with coating suppliers, all their coating is different, right? They have different types of formulation. But how we've been successful is that we know maybe coating one from supplier A, coating two or six from supplier C, and we understand how to apply it on our bottles so that we can achieve the performance that the brands require.
In the food service products, there's typically like a mix, right? A lot of it is internal chemistry. Is that similar when you look at a bottle or a electronic packaging or a cosmetic packaging or a medical packaging where there is a combination? These days, there's a lot of furor around the grease resistant chemicals and stuff like that. But is that similar? Do you have to do a lot of internal chemistry and external, or internals is relatively simpler?
There is something coming up very soon, which I should be able to share with you with regards to what can be done in the fibers itself. I think it's very exciting, but this one, we're in the process of validating it. We hope that we can start doing trials on this more aggressively the later part of this year. So definitely that's something that has to be looked at because if you can solve that at that level, then you won't need as much coatings. Then once again, all the things with coatings, of course, you have to, it has to be done. It has to be validated with the brands, whether we test it internally or they test it. There are multiple opportunities because right now there are a lot of different companies testing out bio-based barriers, which are showing good promise. But from our perspective, it's bio-based barriers great, whether it's compost or the ability for the product to biodegrade. I think the difference is that sometimes they're only working in, once again, very narrow vision, right? They're only doing on one particular, let's say, OTR or VTR. But to combine it together, that's where companies like us, NBCo, has to put in that effort to actually take the different formulations and basically test them out on our substrate.
So, of course, you've come up with such amazing technology, projects, chemistry. How do you see this whole idea of protection, like IP? Is that very important for you? Why I'm asking that is because of our conversation where you said you want to propagate this idea, you want to have more partnerships. So, how do you see that culmination of those two? Because, of course, there's a lot of hard work that goes into creating something, but then you want to also propagate it and make it big. So, how do you see those two things coming together?
That's a very, very good question. I mean, from my point of view, the technology has to be propagated. It has to be shared. In order for us to make a difference, it has to be shared. How we share it, of course, is something that is in discussions right now. But for me, the most important thing is that what the work that we do or how we do it to achieve optimal production of molded fiber across the world. In order for it to make sense, it has to be propagated. I mean, it's not going to be possible that for us to be producing all the bottles out of China and then shipping it around the world. So the right thing to do was to share this technology. Now, from my perspective, there are several ways. One is, of course, if, and right now, I would say that China equipment manufacturing is one of the most efficient in the world. One of the ways that I was thinking of doing it was as long as we can produce part of the machine or provide the schematics, we're more than happy to to sell the machines or license the machines, the production of the machines in country. Because I think that firstly makes sense. I may be romance novels, right? I think it's from my perspective. I just want to make sure this gets done. In my view, I'm not sure how eventually it'll get done, but in a perfect world for me, that this is my perfect world. Okay, my perfect world is this: your existing machines, right? What your existing machines that you have, of course, depending on what machine. I haven't seen your machines yet. If we can convert that so that you can start producing at the quality that we are producing. That is mine. And it's not just your production facility, but it's molded fiber. What we have applied or what we have learned over this last 20, 30 years. If we can take all that knowledge, bring it to another country, and then all of a sudden molded fiber is viable. That is what I would love to see. I would love to see something whereby the technology is transferred, we can scale up with existing technology and then build on new technology onto that so that we have viable alternative solutions. That is my optimal solution.
That's beautiful. And I'm sure you don't want to be challenged by your kids again, right? You don't
Exactly.
want them to say, Dad, what are you
They're now
doing?
bigger than me.
You
They'll,
say you're removing plastic, but I think that's very important for us as well. And I'm sure your kids are growing and so are mine. And we want to make sure we leave a better world for them and the next
yeah.
generation to come. So on that note, there's a lot of listeners that we have who are youngsters entering sustainable packaging. And there's lots of even students who are studying material science and packaging and the domains like that. So what is your advice for them if they want to get into entrepreneurship, if they want to become sustainable packaging entrepreneurs, maybe get into more rigid packaging like you and I, or other stuff? What would your guidance and your advice be to them with your learnings in the past couple of decades?
Eh, eh, Anything that you do, love what you do, have a passion for it. I think that's the most important thing because once you have a passion for it, it doesn't become work. Very often my classmates, right, from earlier days, they will ask me, "Hey man, you fly all around the world, you respond to texts all the time, work must be tough." But they don't understand what we do. I love what I do. I really do love what I do. I really believe in what I do. So when you believe in what you do, it doesn't become work. It just becomes part of your life. It becomes so intertwined that it doesn't matter if I'm up to pick a late night call with a client because what I envision is that by helping them convert, all of a sudden there's a reduction in the use of plastic with that particular brand. And once that domino falls, the next product category, and that excites me. I don't think there's a single day that I don't jump out of bed and go like, all right, let's make a difference. And I do strongly believe that I can make a difference in the lives of someone or a product manager or change a product that day.
Wow, that's amazing. But the one lot of people, like similar to you, I'm obsessed. So, like, again, I probably travel 60 to 70% of my time in a
Yep.
year and I'm all over the map and I have no problems in, meetings at night or meetings in the morning and it's fine. But one lot of people that drive crazy is my team.
Yeah.
They're all like, dude, like you want me to get on a call at 10 p.m. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have this idea. Come on, let's talk. And I'm jumping and they are like, oh my gosh, again, So I don't know how to tackle that, but I'll learn one day to balance things, as they say. Okay, just obviously all wonderful conversations have to go towards a closure. So tell me, what's your dream? So if you were to look at a crystal ball with your impatient soul
Mhm.
in the next 5 years and say that, okay, if there are no barriers holding me back at all, I can solve technology, I can solve the challenge of partnerships and grow this business. So looking at the two sides of your business, both RIPAX and NBCo, what is your dream? How do you imagine? What does scale look like? What would you have changed in 5 years?
5 years. Right now, we're in the process of getting funded. So in 5 years, one of my big goals is to set up a factory in Indonesia. because I'm very close and intertwined with Indonesia because I've been there a lot in my youth. I believe that it's extremely painful for me to watch the amount of plastic and it's extremely painful. So one of my big things is in 5 years, for sure, Indonesia up and running, fully operational, providing alternatives, lobbying for the government to make certain regulations so that we just stop polluting the beaches, we stop polluting the waterways, we just got to stop. So that's my one very big thing. The next very big goal for me, and I know it's kind of narrow, but Europe is extremely important for me. The cost of manufacturing there sometimes it's just not viable. So the way that we're structured it is so that our system should be viable to set up operations in Europe. I think it's very important because once Europe starts, I think there's eventually an opportunity to just propagate this all through Europe. That's the second big one for me. Then the next one, in these 5 years from an operational perspective, I think North America would be something interesting because towards the end of the 5 years, there should be opportunity, right, Vet? Once somebody leaves office.
I like how you refuse to name names in anything.
Yeah, I have to be politically correct.
Well, I was hoping at least in the machine story you would take a name, but you didn't, so I refrained from it also. But I like that you stay away from naming anybody. That's your style. Okay, so my last one. What does good garbage mean to you?
Good garbage for me, because we're all on the product side. So in manufacturing, you always have garbage, right? You always will have garbage. No matter how much you try, there's always residue, there's always garbage. But from my perspective, it's a change in mindset. What is garbage? If you rethink it as an opportunity to turn an undesirable situation into something better, then it becomes good garbage, right? In manufacturing, we used to have quite a large amount of waste, whether it's wastewater, wasted material. Then we looked at this, is there an opportunity that this becomes good garbage? Relook at the manufacturing process, rethink everything. Is there an opportunity to reuse the water? Is there an opportunity whereby the residue can have other applications? Can it be processed to something else? Can it be refined and reused in manufacturing for some other products? I think it's constant need to want to look at something and not put it in the bucket of garbage. I think everything must have an opportunity to be reused. You use the word downcycle. Absolutely. I think that's important. That's how I look at good garbage.
Wonderful, Alvin. It has been such a joy to have met you. And I think it's not just a joy. I think for me, it's an honor to meet someone like you. So what you espouse for me is the idea of perfection, the idea for deep entrepreneurship, and the idea for deep contribution. Those are the three big takeaways I had even the first time we met. And I literally felt, how should I say it? I literally felt like I was at a higher spirit after I left that meeting from you. Because I felt there are people like this who are ready to put their lives on the line to be able to create something that's different. So that's been such a joy, and I know that you are all over the map, and you've taken time out to record. So thank you so much for taking the time, for being with us, and I'm so excited to work with you, to meet you, and to learn from you. So thank you, Alvin.
Thank you so much.